So you'll see here our wonderful speakers that will be coming up later. And this is our definition. There are many and varied different definitions of empathy, but this is the definition that EmpathyLab's come up with. Empathy is being able to experience and understand other people's feelings and points of view. And I also just wanted to highlight this diagram to you because although there are many and varied definitions of empathy, most of the thinkers about empathy say that it's made up of three main elements. So the feeling bit or affective empathy, the thinking bit or cognitive empathy, where we use our reason and imagination to work out how someone's feeling. And the feeling bit is very much about how we resonate with people's emotions. And those two come together into acting or pro-social behaviours, inspired to do something about what we're thinking and feeling. So though it's just useful for you to have those as we go through today's session. But I'm really delighted to start introducing you to some of our wonderful speakers for tonight. And the first speaker is Ashley Crombie, who works for auticon, and she's the neuro inclusion advisor for auticon. Ashley, I think you'll probably say a little bit about auticon, so I won't steal your thunder. And I am going to share screens with you for you. So I'll carry on sharing and say hello and welcome to Ashley.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you all. As Sarah said, I'm Ashley. I'm a neuroinclusion advisor at Auticon. Auticon is a social enterprise that employs autistic people as IT and data consultants. We also do neuroinclusion services for the workplace, which include things like guidance on improving practices and policies in the workplace and providing reasonable adjustments, etc. So that kind of thing there. So with Auticon, I am a neuroinclusion advisor. So I work with clients, but I also coach autistic consultants. I'm a late diagnosed autistic person myself. I was diagnosed when I was 29 and I'm 33 now, so a good few years. And I came from Oxford University, where I worked at the Disability Advisory Services there. And I've just submitted, well, actually, I'm coming to the end of my PhD, which is about autistic communication. So today I'm going to be talking about this kind of, I call it the empathy myth, which is about that sort of relationship between autism and empathy. It's quite a long and complicated topic, as you can imagine. So this will just be a little bit more of a snapshot because we haven't got tons of time today. So that's just my little caveat to today. So Sarah, can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so traditionally there is this the idea that autistic people don't have or can't feel empathy. And this comes from a deficit view of autism. So that's sort of framed by a medical model. It's not to say that the medical model is inherently bad. I'm not saying that. Of course, if you were to go to A&E with a broken leg, you would want somebody to figure out what was wrong and try and cure it. But that doesn't always translate well into a social setting. So places where we're talking about how people live and work and live their lives, you know. So this is where this misconception is partly from. So I'm using a theory called the double empathy problem, which was written by Damon Milton in 2012, who wrote the double empathy problem, or came up with the double empathy problem from the back of Simon Baron-Cohen's theory of mind, which suggests that autistic people struggle to understand others' thoughts and feelings. There was this quote from there where it talks about mind blindness, so not being able to infer the thoughts and feelings of others. And a way that was tested was through the empathy quota, which essentially is a sort of questionnaire of lots of different questions in which you score on like a scale of 1 to 5 how you would relate to that situation. So there are times and places for this. I'm not bashing the entire idea of theory of mind, but sometimes I believe now, you know, that was made quite a few years ago now, so we have a little bit more nuance nowadays. And also some of the questions in the empathy quotient were for me personally, a little bit surprising. Having done the empathy quotient myself, one of the questions was, if you see a worm, do you have the urge to cut it in half or something like that, which was a really bizarre question, I thought, to ask in relation to empathy, you know? Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So the double empathy problem that I just mentioned about that was made by Damon Milton talks about how understanding of empathy takes both ways to understand empathy, right? So what he says there is empathy breakdowns and therefore communication breakdowns often happen from both sides. So from the autistic person's perspective, but also from the non-autistic person's perspective. So what he's trying to say here is that it's not necessarily that autistic people have an inherent sort of deficit of empathy. It's more that autistic people don't understand non-autistic people's version of empathy the same way that non-autistic people don't understand autistic versions of empathy in that way. So that's just to kind of simplify it slightly there. So this has led to cause misunderstandings about how autistic people communicate and communicate their empathy. So my interpretation of the double empathy problem is more, it's about empathy is a feeling that we all have, how we relate to others and sort of work out how they're feeling. But how do you prove that to other people? It's one thing to say, oh, yes, I can feel empathy towards somebody else, but how do you prove that? And my interpretation is it comes down to how we communicate that empathy, how we show other people, oh, yes, I have an idea of what you're saying, or I'm trying to relate to you. And this is me demonstrating that to you. So will we go to the next slide, please, Sarah? Thank you. So when we talk about communicating empathy, empathy itself is an internal experience, and the communication is the external. So I see the expression or the communication of empathy as the internal coming external. So how do people communicate empathy? How do we show people that we understand them and that we're empathetic in that way? Well, usually people would do it through their tone. They might adjust their tone of voice. They might use certain words to show that they are having empathy or demonstrating empathy. They would have gestures, that kind of thing. But I believe that empathy can exist without it being shown in a conventional way. And this is where I think there's a misunderstanding about autistic people and empathy has been. So what I'm trying to say here is I believe that autistic people may feel empathy very deeply, but communicate it in a different way, which has been mistaken as a sort of a lack of empathy, if you like. And this might be because non-autistic people might have a different version of communicating their empathy. So it leads to this sort of misinterpretation, not absence of empathy, I believe. And we'll go to the next slide, please, Sarah.
Oh, I think that's the end of the slide.
That's the end of my slide. No problem.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying about this is, as an autistic person, the way that I would personally show empathy, if I have my best friend sitting next to me and she was in tears about a situation that happened, I would feel sad that she was sad, but I wouldn't feel her sadness. I hope that makes sense, what I'm trying to say. I wouldn't sort of feel the urge to cry myself, but I also wouldn't want her to be sad. So I think something that can happen quite a lot with autistic people is there is a more logic basis to thoughts and feelings, not for all autistic people, but for some. And there is a need for that literal way of speaking. That's my experience as an autistic person anyway. And so for me, I can logically see that my friend is upset, and I could logically understand that I don't want her to be upset because she's my friend and I don't want her to be sad, but I wouldn't be able to feel that feeling for her because they're her feelings and these are my feelings, you know? Now that, to me, that doesn't say that I don't have empathy for her. It doesn't mean I don't understand her feelings. I don't understand what she's thinking. I understand all of those things. But my communication of it would be to help her solve the problem. I take empathy in a very sort of logical and literal way, in the sense that, oh no, you're very sad. What can we do to stop you feeling sad, and make you feel better? So it's kind of like a byproduct in that way. So I was described when I was younger as not having much empathy at school. And the reason for that is I wouldn't extend a hug to somebody if they were crying or something like that. And I would just ask them questions to try to understand their experience in words in that way. So yeah, it's a really interesting topic. And this has been taken in these studies that autistic people don't have or find it challenging to understand empathy in that way. And I disagree. I believe that autistic people show empathy in a very different way, often based on solutions, on discussion, on logic. How can we solve this problem? Or how can we talk our way through and figure out our way through this situation together? And I will offer you all the assistance that I can possibly offer you. So I feel like it's a more practical level of empathy and how that's communicated anyway, in that way. However, saying that, I do know lots of autistic people who cite that, they grew up and they feel such an extreme amount of empathy that they're, when you're a child and you've got all your teddies on the bed, for example, if one of them was to drop off the bed and be on the floor and you wake up and you see one singular teddy on the floor, like your heart is broken because you feel like it's been left out of the rest of the teddy group. And I mean, me personally, I can burst into tears at the sight of a pigeon with a funny leg. So the empathy is there. It's just in a very different way. Is my sum up of autistic people and empathy. And I won't ramble on anymore about that, if that's all right. Sarah, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Ashley. That's really helpful, and it's really interesting to have your personal reflections as well and your personal experience. And there is I know the saying about that every autistic person is different. It's not a one size fits all, isn't it? But it's really helpful to have that sort of personal reflection. So thank you very much, and thanks for coming today, Ashley. And Ashley's got her Viva on. Was it Monday, did you say? So good luck with that, Ashley, for Monday
thank you.
As well. And please do put any questions for Ashley and anyone else in the chat as we go, and we'll pick them up in a bit. But first of all, I'm going to hand straight over to Helen now. Helen Demetriou. Helen's a chartered psychologist. She's currently Associate Professor of Psychology in the Faculty of Education at the University of Cambridge, and she's a Fellow of Homerton College. So Helen's been a friend to EmpathyLab for a long time now, and I'm really excited to hear her speak tonight. So welcome, Helen.
Hello, thank you, Sarah, very much. Thank you for the introduction. It's really lovely to see you and so many familiar faces and names today. So thank you for having me here. As you say, I've now worked with EmpathyLab for a while, but now in my capacity talking about autism and empathy, this is just a fascinating area. And Ashley, thank you for what you've just said. I agree with so much and everything really of what you've said, thinking deeply and picking up words that I think are very relevant. Just to give you an idea, my research goes way back to the early 90s when I actually looked at empathy in very young children. I was observing toddlers in the home when their peers became distressed, and was curious to know how much empathy those children showed towards their peers. And also whether it differed depending on whether they caused that distress themselves or whether they were just onlookers. So that's where my research started. And ever since then, as a psychologist, I've been in education. So for the last 26 plus years now, looking at pupil voice and listening to pupils in schools, because that's important to empathise with them, for them to be able to empathise with themselves and understand about themselves. But what I want to say a little bit now is about those two different sides of empathy that Ashley spoke about, which I think are proportionally a little bit different among autistic people. So there's a term, the latest research looks at what's called the disequilibrium of empathy among autistic people. And what that means, and what's been identified recently, is that there's a disproportionate, often, although is actually rightly mentioned, it's all on a spectrum and it depends on the individual, but typically autistic people can feel a significant amount of the more affective type of empathy. So just to be clear, empathy comprises, broadly speaking, of two components. You have the more affective or emotional side of empathy, and then you have the more cognitive or perspective side of empathy. One of them, the affective, allows that real connection with the other person, that real emotional connection where we feel what that other person is feeling quite deeply. And whereas the more perspective-taking cognitive empathy is that more, if you like, regulatory understanding of what's going on. Now, what's been identified in individuals, autistic individuals, is that they typically, although as I say, I'm generalizing, have more of the affective type of empathy going on, where they're very immersed in the other person's experience and situation, to the degree that sometimes it can become overwhelming. So this disequilibrium that's been now coined as a result. So what's also been interestingly found in these studies is that autistic people do not have any less empathy. And this is where it's so much more nuanced than we've known. And ever since I started my research, we've come leaps and bounds. So the empathy levels are actually as much, if not more, sometimes, or at least not any less than neurotypical individuals, if you like. So what sometimes happens then is an overwhelming amount of affective empathy that's not necessarily regulated by the more cognitive empathy that's happening. So that's, I'm just sort of thinking about where the literature is. What I think is also very important to understand is that if there's an overwhelming part of empathy that's happening, one more than the other, the affective more than the cognitive, or even vice versa, then that helping behavior, and that's the third component of empathy that's very, very important. You can feel and you can understand, but very importantly, empathy is a kind of a power, as a function, leads to being able to help. And what the research has shown is if there's too much of one more than another type of empathy, that helping behavior is sometimes not as effective, because maybe one is too overwhelmed with one's own feelings and thoughts, or one is thinking in a more, where other traits come in, which is more sort of cognitive empathy, where you're thinking a lot about it, but not feeling as much, and therefore not able to help to the degree that you perhaps could. So your efforts are concentrated elsewhere. So I'm just trying to sort of think about those three components of empathy and how they relate to autistic individuals compared with perhaps neurotypical individuals. But as I said, there are always individual differences where this is concerned. But what it really is, I think, interesting to note is that by knowing about this disequilibrium, it gives a clue. So if we identify this at early ages through observation, through how children behave in the classroom or at home, then this can give a clue to early potential diagnosis, which I think is really valuable. If we have these insights and know there might be a tipping of this balance, then that's another thing that can help with the potential diagnosis and to be able to help children, and possibly to be able to help them as well with so many valuable interventions, as one being, of course, EmpathyLab's wonderful materials. So just to say that at that point, Sarah, I don't know if there was anything else at this point you'd like me to talk about.
I think maybe we could go to the questions, Helen. So thank you for that. And if we just to start to hand over to think about those materials, I'm really interested from both of you to think about books and stories and the role of books and stories in supporting autistic children and adults. Indeed, can books and stories really support them to, support them to perhaps understand emotions or understand feelings or to understand how other people are thinking in the way that they do with every child really, but do books and stories help? I suppose I'd love to know what both of your experiences and reflections are on that.
I mean,
to start, Helen.
Yeah, I mean, if I may, Sarah, yes, if that's right, just to say, from my experiences, all sorts of immersive experiences help. So books, films, anything that children can become immersed in, things that especially where autistic individuals are concerned, if there's enough of something within those interventions or those resources they can identify with in a safe way, then and there's material to be taught in terms of what empathy and emotions are, then those emotions can be learnt more readily. So it's using materials cleverly in a way that is approachable, is child-friendly, is age-appropriate, and where the children can identify, but also become immersed and be able to talk to somebody. So those early discussions are really important, to be able to have interactive discussions around these resources as well is very important, and to understand from an early age how to explain any overwhelming feelings that might be happening and what those feelings mean and how they're reflecting in that individual, and to be able to reassure that person that those feelings are something that, albeit they might be overwhelming, are a natural thing and are actually something that can be talked about, discussed, and used to the benefit of that individual, but also other people. So I think the moral for me is to do these interventions, picture stories, and I know we have a wonderful person talking about her books soon, but also to be able to disseminate these materials really in a way that's, well, firstly identifying those children, but to be able to use them early on so that they grow up with them. Because what has also been shown in the literature is that empathy, we have a little bit of it, but it goes by the wayside. And it goes by the wayside as we grow older quite readily, and as adults as well, and in neurotypical, if you like, populations as well. And this is where I think a constant education of what this social skill is about is very vital.
I agree with that, Helen, and something that you said made me remember something that I still do now to this day as a 33-year-old is if I'm in a rush somewhere and I'm running a bit late and I'm feeling, anxious, as an autistic person, I can find it really difficult to know how I feel at that moment. And I say to myself in my head, or I'll explain how I feel to people, like, oh, I feel like Cinderella when she lost her shoe and she was getting into her carriage trying to rush home before midnight. That's how I feel, so I still use storylines in that way and characters to help myself understand how I feel and also to explain that to other people as well. And I suppose sometimes I would do that for others to make sense of their experiences. I will use characters like, oh, they feel like Jack Sparrow when he was in the thing and he heard the cannons and he says, I know those cannons. That's how they must feel right now, So it's about that relating it to characters and books that I've read in the past.
Oh, and I really like what you said, Ashley, about, just to say that how you're identifying, that's your coping, that's how you regulate, that's how, we all do it in so many different ways. It's trying to get to the bottom of how I can deal with this. Oh, somebody else has gone through it. They went through this similar scenario because I can identify with that person. They dealt with it very well. There was a happy ending, if you like. I can do this as well. It's getting children to relate to real life, fiction, all shapes and forms of things, to be able to to cope with, and it's doing it in so many different creative ways as well, as you say, through storytelling, through drawing. It's something that children should not be allowed not to do. They should be able to express themselves in whichever way relieves that sort of any tension or discomfort. And so I love the way you've done that for yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, really interesting. I've had a couple of questions that have come in. So I'll ask these. Aoife, if you want to jump in on any of these as well, please feel free to. I know we'll have some
Oh yeah,
questions
I was
from
just
you.
gonna say I totally agree, and I actually do the same thing. I was getting a picture up there because it made me laugh, because when I have like no energy and I'm burnt out, this is my character. This is how I describe to my friends that I'm not going out. This is how I feel. I'm like, don't even talk to me. It's, you know, the character from SpongeBob. That's literally, yeah. So I really relate to that as well.
Thank you. So Anthony's asking, how would you say that a child with what used to be called selective mutism can demonstrate empathy? And additionally, what do you recommend parents can do to improve their communication and empathy with their children? Helen, do you want to start off, or would Ashley like to start with that one?
Ashley, would you like to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I would just say there's ways to demonstrate that empathy, even if speech is not the form of communication that they're using. People talk about love languages and what your love language is and all of that kind of thing. And I think there's things like acts of service or words of affirmation and all these kinds of things. And I think they're ways that we demonstrate how we are feeling about someone or relating to somebody there. So it might be that if speech isn't their preferred communication style, it could be other forms that you may notice that they do. What is it that my cousin's got she's autistic, but she doesn't use speech at all to communicate. And her thing is like pebbling, so if she's thinking of you, she'll like give you a little token of something. She makes these little origami things and she'll just give them to you. So in that way, I think there's other ways to demonstrate this, not just through speech, it's not just through touch. And I relate that back to that, where love languages, I know that's not really hard science, if you like, but it's something that's commonly used, to describe things.
Interesting.
And I think that's lovely. And I think, as you say, actually, quite rightly, there are so many different forms of communication. It's not just talking, it's being creative. It's through play, it's through reading to the child maybe doesn't speak themselves, but they can hear, and it's maybe then reading something that impacts on them. And so anything where they can communicate their thoughts more creatively through drawing perhaps, and then using those materials to base the conversation on, which maybe then will spark that child, give them enough. It could be different things, of course, underlying the mutism. So it depends what's going on neurologically or psychologically. But the point is trying to get through to that individual in some way, so that to give them more confidence, potentially to be able to break that silence, if possible.
Thank you, Helen. Yeah. And Angela's just asked a question. I'll just ask this question and I'll move on to Aoife. But she says, does this tie into Gestalt language processing and echoed phrases are actually communication, not repetition, e.g. stories and films, scripts, songs, etc.? I'm not sure I understand that, but Helen, you might.
Do you mean that sort of echolalia where you're copying a sound that you hear, which is something that I know lots of autistic people do, especially, I mean, I do it myself as well. If somebody says something in a certain way, I say they get stuck in my mouth and I can't seem to get it out. But every time that you do that, you do think of the person or the noise or whatever it was that you heard. So there is something about it sort of gets stuck in your head and stuck in your mouth, as I say, because it sort of scratches your brain, if that right, the sound, or it's because it's a situation that you use to describe a particular feeling. So a personal example of this is One of my cats is called Calypso, and I always go to her, Kelly, and that's my like little cat noise that I make for her. But that has now transcended to anyone that I have any form of affection towards. I call them Callie now in my head. So that's because that's the feeling, being replicated around. So I don't know if that actually answers your question, or I've kind of got off on a tangent talking about my cat, but
Angela, do you want to unmute and just let us know if that's an answer for you? If you can, you might not be able to, because I know you're on an iPhone. No, maybe just let us know in the chat, and I'll just move on to Anthony's just talking about Elle McNichols is a kind of spark, and so if you'd read it 10 years ago, it's been so helpful for us as parents. It's so brilliant, and I should say Elle is going to be appearing live on Empathy Day itself on the 12th of June on Thursday. So do watch out for that. But we're also absolutely delighted that we have a brilliant author with us this evening, and it's Aoife Dooley. Aoife's an award-winning illustrator, writer, comedian. She's best known for the graphic novel series Frankie's World and Finding My Voice, which are both on our Read for Empathy book collections. So if you go onto our EmpathyLab's website and look up Read for Empathy, you'll find those books. They're both brilliant. But Aoife and I are going to have a bit of a conversation now. So I'll just going to close the chat for a minute whilst I can see Aoife a bit better. And if you could spotlight Aoife, Becca, that would be really helpful. So welcome, Aoife. It's great to have you with us. And I just wanted really to get your reflection on the importance of books written authentically by autistic writers and their importance and their value really for children, and actually to support everyone to understand people a bit better, understand all of us a bit better.
Yeah, I think what I talk about a lot in the field that I work in, so I make graphic novels, and even just graphic novels in themselves, I think are like I think a lot of not everyone, but I think a lot of autistic people are visual learners as well. So I think it's a in that in itself is a way of kind of like I grew up, for example, not like reading novels because it would just go into my head and out the other side. I couldn't pick it up that way. So it's like another way of storytelling. I think that like we kind of like different ways of storytelling sometimes. But I think with having like so Frankie's World is loosely based on my own story. So I was diagnosed at 27. I wasn't diagnosed when I was younger. So I'm 34 now. So and for me, I know growing up, I wasn't really into reading novels because I found them hard to read and concentrate on. But also I never really found any characters that were like me in books or reminded me of me. And I was quite aware at that age that I was different. I think I think I've seen someone say something a couple of years ago where it's like when you're in primary school, for example, it's like everyone else knows there's something except you. And that's kind of how it really feels. And I kind of wanted to write a story based on that and kind of not really fully understanding who you are or why people kind of behave the way they do towards you when you don't know that you're autistic. And I think it's important to have own voices, stories, because they're real life experiences almost at times, like, and they're like lived experiences of other autistic people too, particularly with bullying. Like, so there's a lot of like people who would have experienced bullying, I think, growing up. And so I guess with like, myself, like being vulnerable and talking about those things, I didn't think that would help a lot of people. And it was kind of learning to be empathetic towards myself too, because I feel like, um, I don't know. I feel like a lot of us can be hard on ourselves when we're growing up when we don't understand what's going on and we're like, oh, why are we so different? Why am I so weird? All these kind of things. So, Frankie's World for me was kind of like more like um a hug to my younger self and to anyone else who's felt like that. Like, and it's a story about like feeling comfortable in who you are and proud of who you are and that it's okay to be different. And that's, yeah. So I think own voices in that way, you can kind of really speak to other autistic kids and they really understand what you're talking about because they are experiencing similar things, if that makes sense. So I think it's really important. And there's more and more books coming out, graphic novels and novels with autistic characters written by autistic authors. And I think that's a great thing. And it's I think it should be like this in every aspect though, own voices across the board. It's um I think it's the best way to learn about different things and from people's voices who experience these things every day. Yeah.
Thank you, Aoife. That's really, really important. And I mean, you said you didn't read many books growing up, read many novels growing up. Can you just give us a sort of little bit of a reflection of your experience of books and stories
Yeah.
and
I
non-fiction in general?
I liked picture books when I was a kid, and then I kind of remember as I got a bit older, it was like, oh, like graphic novels aren't appreciated as much as they are now as they were back then. They weren't really seen as a real book almost. It was just something you'd read for fun, like a comic. And I feel like when I was growing up, it was like, oh, you have to read this book. It's a real book. And I just had no interest. I remember buying the Harry Potter books and trying to read it, and I was like, this thing is way too big for me. I'm not going to read this. And it made me feel kind of silly or stupid because I couldn't. And it wasn't that I couldn't, it was just that I wasn't interested in just looking at the words. I wanted pictures as well and a visualization of what that was. And I feel like I was kind of like almost forced into like reading novels. And it was only my auntie that kind of introduced me to like Calvin and Hobbes. And then when I was a kid as well, like when I stayed in my grandparents' house, they used to get the paper. So I'd always grab the paper once I realized that there was a comic strip in it. So these are the kind of ways that I would read. And but other than that, no, I was very much that kid who played video games in their room all the time. I would not probably, I did like Jacqueline Wilson's books. They were the only books I'd read that because they had illustration and it was like kind of more like a novel. But that's as far as I would have went, I think. But yeah. So I kind of, yeah, I think I got confidence as well in recent years by writing and reading more. And it's only as an adult I'm learning that now. So when I see kids who typically are reluctant readers because they're autistic or they have ADHD and they find it hard to concentrate in a book, and how excited they are when they actually finish a book and they're like, this is 200 and something pages. I finished this and I done it in an hour, and they're so excited. I know that feeling because I only had that feeling probably in the last couple of years myself when I finished my own first graphic novel reading someone else's. And it is so I kind of I feel like in a way I'm kind of I can empathize in that way as well, where it's like when you feel like you can't read and reading's not for you, and you realize, oh no, it is for me, it's for everybody. So that's, yeah.
And that really makes the case, doesn't it? That, as you say, reading isn't one type of genre or category of books. It's really got to be a very broad spectrum because everyone reads differently and everyone will respond differently. Are there sort of techniques that you would recommend to teachers and librarians to really engage autistic kids in reading? Are there things that you, from your wide experience, and I guess going into schools and talking to children, what is it that really will stimulate them and engage them? What are the things that reassure them about reading as well?
Oh, I do a lot of workshops in schools, and I think it's just taking the time, because I think a lot of the time we live like in a fast-paced world, and we kind of like leave things or forget or leave people behind sometimes in a classroom when there's a lot of people in a class. And I think when I'm doing workshops, I like to take time with people. So if someone's like confused about what to do, or they're not sure what to do, it's like taking the time to talk to someone, but also giving someone the time to express something in their way. It might take someone longer to do something than other people, and I think it's important to be patient in that way and not to be like hurry up. And because I think everyone works at different speeds as well, and that's something that I've learned from doing the workshops. I think I answered your question there. I'm not sure if I went kind of
Yeah,
off
no,
there
yeah,
sometimes.
that's really interesting. And I was just thinking when you were talking about reading aloud and sharing stories with a class, and how does that work for autistic children as well, to be in a class situation listening to stories together?
I'm not too sure. I've never went in to read from Frankie's World. I've always done workshops, but what I have noticed is it definitely brings people out of their shell. So the quietest person might be the chattiest person by the end of the workshop, and it's who you're sitting beside as well. You're sitting beside people who have similar interests to you. They have similar experiences to you, and you end up talking to them. And if they go to like another workshop in a couple of months, you're making friends. So I think in that way it's more a safe space, not really kind of feeling like you have to be involved. I always kind of let people know that they can like, get up and walk around, or they don't need to do this in this moment in time. They can do this or whatever they want. And I think those things kind of help too. Yeah.
Yeah, so just letting people respond in their own way to
Yeah. And
to
given the
what's not
space
needed
and
for them.
being
Yeah,
patient, I think are the big
yeah,
things, I think, yeah.
that's really helpful.
But
Thank
for
you.
me personally, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. You were going to share some of your books, your favorite books that are written authentic by with an authentic voice, weren't you?
Oh yeah,
So,
I think I have some here. Let me see if I
brilliant.
cover it all. Giving a good plug here. Let me see. Oh yeah, I have one here. What's this one here? Um, this is a great one. It's a different kind of normal, and it's by Abigail Balfe, and she's written and illustrated this too. Um, it's a bit more of a younger audience, but it's also what I really like about this book is it has like a directory in the back, and it goes through a lot of different things in this book. And it's really well illustrated as well. It's a really nice I don't know if you can see some of here, but this is one of the books I really like, and I don't think I have some of the other ones here, but I have them here on my phone, just the names. I have books all over the place, so I don't know where the other ones are, and I'm not going to go looking because I'll end up like taking up all the time. Speak Up by Rebecca Burgess is a really great book as well. That's a graphic novel too. That probably be for it'd probably be similar age group to Frankie's World actually. It'd be like 8 to 12, and that's about a girl, and she's basically in school, and she's also a pop star outside of school, but nobody knows that it's her, and she's actually like she's gone viral, and she's really popular as a pop star, but in school she's not popular, nobody knows who she is. And it's like it's a really nice story. And there's another one out. I haven't actually read this one yet, but I think it's only out recently, if I'm correct. I don't know. It's called Being Autistic by Neve Garvey, and it's also illustrated by Rebecca Burgess. And that basically, I remember seeing this in a bookshop, and I had a look through, and I think this is very similar to a different sort of normal, but for like maybe an older age group as well. And I'm just giving kind of graphic novel kind of like recommendations here because they're kind of what I'm interested in. But I think yeah, they would be the ones that kind of have stood out to me in the last while, graphic novel wise, and yeah, and just for information as well, and own voices too, because all these people I've mentioned are autistic as well, and illustrators and writers. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And Kirsten, thank you for putting them in the chat because we'll add them to our list. I think
Oh,
we've
thank
had
you.
Abigail Balfe's book is on one of our Read for Empathy lists as well. So thank you. Thank you so much, Aoife. It's really been interesting hearing your reflections. So we've got a little bit of time. Oh yeah, just a new spelling.
On
A
it,
little
it's the
bit of
Irish
time
names
left.
are hard.
A little bit of time just for answering any questions. So I was going to ask Helen and Ashley to join as well now so that we can answer any further questions that people have around this area because sorry, Ashley, do you want to talk a little bit about your PhD and just what you're the autistic communication? Because that's come up quite a lot as we've been in the chat around communication and the importance of communication. It's also been coming up in both you and Helen have said.
Yeah. So it's about looking at autistic communication, and I'm using internet memes to do that. So I'm sure everyone knows what an internet meme is, but like little images with like the text that get shared around online. Anyway, so yeah, I'm looking at how and why autistic people may use internet memes to communicate and what they communicate through the memes. Some of the findings of that have been that autistic people enjoy sharing memes, and I'm sure this counts for non-autistic people too, but obviously I was interested in autistic people. Use memes because they are multimodal, so you can have like an image and then not just an image like a stock boring image, but you get usually they're snippets from TV shows that we used to watch when we were kids. Like I've got loads of the Simpsons memes or SpongeBob memes, all of that kind of thing. So there's like an element of culture to the image, or like a snapshot of a cultural piece of time. And people who have seen that as well, they'll know what that character was feeling at the time or what was going on to make them feel like that. Then you'll have the text on the top where people will like put their own context on that, like me at work or something like that. And then it'll be the SpongeBob. I'm thinking of your one, Aoife, where he's there like that. And then yeah, so there's that. There's a few different layers to that. There's like the cultural snapshot and then your own context on the top. But also another thing is sometimes like me as an autistic person, I can find it really hard to work out how it is I'm feeling and therefore describe that to other people or even piece it together in words without going off on a big long tangent that explains a whole backstory as to why I feel like that. A meme is just like one thing and it's easily consumable and you just get it or you just don't get it, you know, and yes, it releases the burden of having to explain how you feel and make sure you get the wording right so they do actually understand how you feel when you can just show them with a meme. So that was another positive thing. And then there was also elements of like social identity in there as well. So there's lots of memes that talk about this like us and them and like autistic and non-autistic and all of this kind of thing as well. So there's quite a few different things that came up from the memes. But the main thing is not having to use speech to communicate. Or have to, I don't know, one of my participants said that the reason they like to use memes is when they're trying to explain how they feel about something, they don't have to write a whole thesis in their head to then cut it all down, get it into like 2 sentences, and then get that across in a way that makes sense to the person. Also, sometimes when you're feeling a big emotion, there's not even sometimes the words don't match the size of the emotion. So I think there is a suggestion that, you know, neurodivergent people as a whole tend to use quite like dramatic language. I don't want to say like they're being dramatic, but the language is really big. And that's to get across the bigness of the feeling that they have inside, which sometimes words just don't do enough of. So by having a meme with an image, normally it's a really exaggerated image, you know, like you might just be feeling a bit tired, for example, or like you feel really tired. So you can't, having a picture of someone like in their bed asleep is not the level of tiredness. Like we need to be withered. We need to be unable to move. That's how tired I feel, you know? So that's really what I got from the PhD. But I'm going to stop myself because I can feel a tangent coming on. So I'm going to stop. Otherwise I'll just keep talking.
Well, thank you for that. I think that sounds absolutely fascinating. And when you got it, and we'll all have to read it because it sounds really amazing and really interesting as well. What an interesting piece of research. Thank you for sharing that with us, Ashley, and we are keeping our fingers crossed for you. I've seen Anthony's got quite a lot of sort of comments in the chat. Anthony, would you mind unmuting yourself and just telling us about your experience? If you're able to. Some people can, some people can't. No, okay, no worries, Anthony, that's fine. It's just interesting to hear about your writing and so on as well. But thank you. No worries at all, Anthony. Thanks very much for letting us know. Okay, I'm going to, in that case, I'm going to just, first of all, I want to just give a huge thank you to Ashley and Helen and Aoife. It's been a really, really fascinating hour. It's gone so fast. I can't believe it. So thank you so much for all of your insights and sharing. And yeah, I feel like I've learned an awful lot from you today. I'm just going to share my screen again to just give everybody a bit of a hint and information about what's still to come in terms of our Empathy Day Festival. So I hope you can see that. Right, okay, so we are, as I said, over halfway through the festival now, but we've still got another 3 days to go for the festival and lots of more activities to come. So if you haven't already signed up or watched any of the events, then please do so. So you can register for free resources by using the QR code on the screen now, or you can go onto the website and register them. And you can also watch on demand all the author events and webinars that we've already had, so do that too. There will be a live event with Elle McNichol and Joseph Coelho on Thursday, so I think it's 2 o'clock. So do register for that if you haven't already and you've got time and you're able to do it and engage with it live. With lots of schools are engaging with that as well. So we've got a very big audience and we're looking forward to that. And do take part in the empathy challenge as well if you haven't already. So that's 9 challenge activities that you can do at home or in school or in a library. So lots of activities for children, adults to do together to take part in the empathy challenge, including things like an empathy bookshelf where you can recommend your favourite empathy reads. And then finally, I just wanted to tell you all, you must save the date, 27th of November. We are having a major conference in London in person called Raising Generation Empathy. It's both a conference which will share research that's currently being conducted by the University of Sussex, looking at children's empathy and reading at a primary school. So particularly looking at the difference between their affective and cognitive empathy in terms of reading fiction. So we're really looking forward to hearing the results of that. But it will also share practice. So we'll also be having teachers and librarians talking about what's happening in schools when they're taking part in reading for empathy practices. So we've got some amazing speakers. We have Michael Rosen, Patrice Lawrence, 2 amazing authors. We've also got Az Dasu, who's going to come along, and Jion Shabani, so 2 other authors. They'll be in conversation. We've got the CEO of the PSHE Association, Jonathan Bagley, and Anthony Kessel, who is both an author, an amazing author actually, and also the National Deputy Director for NHS England. So, and that's just a snapshot of some of the speakers that we've got coming along on that day. We really want that day to help us scale our reading for empathy practices in schools, to really embed empathy as a key social and emotional skill that can be delivered through books and stories and reading. And we want to actually think about how we get those empathy practices into policy and education. So it's going to be an important conference and we'd love to see you all there.